1976 would be the last year for the super huge Electra that ran from 1971 all the way through the 1976 model year. And it was so huge, in fact, that the Electra had outlived its name. It was no longer a true deuce and a quarter. And what do I mean by that? Well, despite the brochure that you see here, that deuce and a quarter nomenclature, the Electra 225, came from the fact that the Electra was 225 inches long. But by this point in 1976, the actual length of the car was about 233 inches. So it had grown well past its deuce and a quarter length. And that was in large part because of the bumper impact standards that mandated these huge bumpers and large fender extensions in the rear that made the car significantly longer than what it was back when it was bestowed with that name. Regardless, Buick decided to continue calling it the Electra 225, and as you can see here, for 1976, there was the Electra 225, which was the base vehicle. There was the Electra Limited, and then there was the top-of-the-line Electra Park Avenue, a trim that was introduced in 1975 and had this huge overstuffed interior. But what we're going to talk about today is this particular 1976 Electra Limited, so the mid-level of the lineup in between the base 225 and the upper end Park Avenue. And this is a particularly beautiful two-door coupe in a white and red combination, which is one of my favorites, although I think I wish the exterior in this were actually kind of the dark red as well. In any case, let's talk about this Electra. So for 1976, one of the things to point out is that the car had been restyled for the 1975 model year, but the grille kind of spilled out in 1975 underneath the headlamps. And for 1976, designers revised the front end such that the grille, with its texture within a texture grille, just stayed away from the headlights. So the area underneath the headlights didn't have that grille spilling out like it did for the 1975 model year. And you can also see a bit that for the 1976 model year, designers are preparing customers for the forthcoming 1977 model year with this look, with kind of the quad headlights and the turn signals underneath and this grille with the vertically oriented bars. That was something that would be very similar on the 1977 model year. And if you contrast this particular Electra with where the model year started in 1971, you can just kind of see a very linear progression toward what would then be the next generation that would arrive for the 1977 model year. As we look at this angle, one other thing I'll point out is you certainly have that prow to the hood, that bulge area in the center section, but one thing that this Buick did not do, the other General Motors cars did, was have the fender tops also kind of mimic that elevated position similar to the prow. Here, the fender tops are flush with that lower portion of the hood line. And that was, again, a little bit different, gave the front end something that was different from some of the other General Motors divisions at the time that had the fender tops also being relatively tall. Now, as we rotate to the side, we can see one of the typical Buick characteristics of this era, and that is that diving line that goes down the entire body side. It starts with the filleted section there on the hood and the header panel, and it just continues back, kind of wraps around the side of the car, and then goes down the quarter panel. That was something that was a character trait of Buick's for many years. In some years, like the mid to late 1960s, it was more of a swage line on the body side that had kind of an S-curve, but here it is, and something that was familiar as opposed to just the sweep spear that we also think about as being a typical Buick trait today. Of course, this car has the 4 Ventaports, and they are kind of inset in this very long body side molding. I think that's a pot metal molding, but that molding continues the entire length of the car. That was standard on the Limited trim. And to me, it looks a little overdone. I actually like the base 225 that doesn't have that molding better because I think it takes away from that diving line on the side. Here you've got that diving line and you have this big body side molding. It looks okay, but I actually just prefer not to have it there. And of course, many of these cars also have the door edge guards, and so you get a lot of conflicting things just because of all the doodadery that has been added to the car, and I wish that sometimes the designers and owners just wouldn't opt for that stuff so that you can see the car in its pure form. Of course, one of the other things that you'll see here is the huge cornering light, something that was popular during this time. Cornering lights were introduced in 1972 by Cadillac, but here on this Limited, they're very large. So I guess you can illuminate that area to the side of the vehicle so you can see it as you go around the corner when you put your turn signal on. You also notice that scalloped section beneath the cornering lamp. I believe that's there such that in the event that the bumper has to compress, it's not damaging any sheet metal. So by this point, designers were actually trying to keep the bumper closer to the body, but that required area on the body side for it to kind of jounce back and forth in the event that the car hits something. So again, you see that scalloped out section that I previously mentioned. Of course, this car also has the beautiful road wheels. And this is the last generation where the cars had a pretty significant amount of tumble home. In other words, the roof panel is not as wide as the center section of the body. The body and the glass kind of curve inward. Huge curved side glass on this car. And that just gives it this wide look, particularly from the dead-on front, dead-on rear, that you otherwise don't have. And notice how the body tucks in near the rockers as well, just accentuating the overall midsection as being the widest part of the car. Now, as we rotate to the rear, we can see some of the Achilles heels of this car, namely the fender extensions. That rubber flubber, at least when it was original, the rubber flubber section aft of the quarter panel there, again, to ensure that that area can compress if it's hit. That particular part of the car wasn't designed to last 50-ish years, and so now if you have even the low-mileage cars, those are pretty much cracked and have crumbled, or they will crack and crumble. Don't go at a car show up to one of those fender extensions and squeeze it, because you're going to give the owner a panic attack unless he or she has replaced them on the car. Now a lot of them are hard and they're fiberglass, and I think these have been replaced. You can tell the paint match isn't perfect and the fit near the bottom isn't that great, although I have to say the fit in the factory also wasn't that great on these. But one thing that always bothered me was that the molding, as an example, didn't continue into the fender extension. It looks like it should continue further to the rear, but of course you couldn't do that because the fender extension had to compress with no damage. Now, you also notice you have this crosshatch design on the taillights and the full-width tail lamp look. That was a Buick hallmark and a Buick styling trait. So a number of the styling traits in this car are kind of unmistakably Buick. That full-width tail lamp treatment, the road wheels just scream Buick, and then that diving line that I mentioned before down the body side. Some things that distinguish this Buick from others. I do like how the reverse lamps are integrated into the bumper, and in some cases those would actually glow almost like running lights. When you put the headlamps on, they would glow red, and then when you put the reverse light on, it would be white, obviously, to signify that the car was backing up. A neat little touch. Now, here we are and taking a look at the interior, this beautiful wine color interior on the Limited. Notice that you have the full-length armrest, you have the lit door panel, you have some of the cloth that's there on the door panel, as well as a casket door pull. Just a very luxurious interior, and clearly the Limited buyer wanted to step up from the base Electra and certainly the LeSabre. You got the same dash in both, but you did get a different and more upgraded interior. And here you also have the kind of bittens and buskets, the buttons and biscuit style interior. I'm going to leave that in here just so people can laugh at that audio clip. With the cloth that is mixed with the vinyl on the midsection as well as the sides of the seats. But again, I think this color is fantastic, and this is clearly a low mileage car. And how do you know? Because those shoulder belt guides, the plastic, they're still intact. That is something that generally by 20 or 30,000 miles had just fallen apart. But this is a very low mileage car. I think it's under 10,000 miles, and the condition is quite beautiful. And here you can see the interior and the seats up close. This, I guess it's a velour, but more of a crush style velour. And it almost looks like it's got a wood grain to it in that section above the loose cushion area on the backrest. Let's just call it a very 70s era interior, but, comfortable, and one that you could sit in and take a ride for some period of time. Although the one bummer about these is that I don't believe GM offered in this Electra a reclining passenger seat. Ford by this point was smart enough to do that, but GM just stuck with the fixed backrests, and it's kind of a bummer because, the passenger might want to take a nap or something when you're driving on a road trip. So that kind of stinks. But other than that, a comfortable place to be. Now, a couple neat little accessories that I wanted to point out for your Buick are this outside thermometer. And this was available on other General Motors vehicles, but you can see you would actually look outside the window and you could tell what the temperature was by reading this thermometer. And like I said, a lot of GM divisions have this as optional. The cool thing about it was that when you turned the headlamps on, there's actually a little light bulb here. It would illuminate, so you could tell the temperature whether it was day or night. And of course, you have the old school Buick logo here with the little reindeer. I miss that logo. I like the Tri-Shield. They still have the Tri-Shield, although they've modernized it, but I just thought this was a cool variation of it. And these particular wire wheel covers I wanted to show because they're clearly Buick with the old school Buick Tri-Shield logo. But interestingly, I believe these are the same wheel covers that AMC was using for a number of years on its cars. But it would just put a sticker over top of the Buick logo. So it would buy the same wheel covers and then dump the AMC sticker over top of it. I mean, you gotta love AMC. It's like on the ignition boxes Underhood on some AMCs. It's the Motorcraft ignition setup. And some of the wiring even says FOMOCO. But on the box, AMC put their logo on a sticker just right over top of the Motorcraft logo. Gotta love AMC, one of my favorite. All makes combined, American Motors. And that leaves us with what's under hood in this Buick, and that is the standard 455 cubic inch 4-barrel V8 that made, by this point, an unfortunate 205 horsepower, 345 pound-feet of torque. The horsepower was way down from the 1970 model year, as an example, in part because until 1972, these engines were rated on a gross horsepower basis without the accessories and the air cleaner and the exhaust. But the other thing was the emissions were really choking them down. And by this point, you also had the catalytic converter that was added to these vehicles in 1975. So the back pressure and the flow out the exhaust wasn't as great as what it used to be either. So that was a bummer, but it was very smooth power for your Buick. You can tell the Buick V8s because you have the distributor in the front. Cadillac would also have distributors in the front, but the Buicks have the air conditioning on the same side as the alternator with that double belt that goes over top of the alternator. Cadillacs had the air conditioning compressor in the middle, which actually made a lot of sense from a vibration standpoint. You don't want the air conditioning ideally out on some bracket far away from the engine because it's just going to amplify the vibration. But these air conditioning compressors from the GM Frigidaire division were very vibration-free and quite silent, particularly when you compared that with the old school kind of Tecumseh York two-piston compressors that Ford used on many of its cars for some period of time. Those definitely had a more noticeable and pronounced vibration. But these GM compressors were really, really nice, and you would be frozen out if you wanted to be in your car. You also notice this car has cruise control. There's the cruise control transducer with the vacuum lines going to it. And by this point, Buick was painting its engines this blue color. And I kind of like them, I have to say, when they were red a few model years earlier. The blue I think GM was trying to go to a corporate blue because they wanted to start combining the engines. They didn't want you to know that one was a Buick or a Chevrolet or an Oldsmobile V8 or a Chevrolet V8. So they just started painting them a corporate blue, but you clearly can tell what the engine is just by the features and the accessories. And this is really very clearly a Buick. Good V8 engines. Only thing about them is the front timing covers are kind of tough to get off. The water pump job on these sucks. It's a terrible, terrible job. Oil pumps sometimes can get weak, but in general, the engine itself is a very, very good engine and very lightweight casting as well. The other thing about the underhood area here, which is interesting to me, is Buick was the only division that had this kind of white plastic fan shroud with the coolant bottle, the overflow bottle, as well as the washer fluid bottle attached to it. It's not a bad idea. It just came out in Buick in 1973. Don't know why any other division didn't adopt it, but it seems to make sense, and I wonder if this came in as a modular assembly. And so not only was it functional, but it could have saved labor time because you're not installing a washer fluid bottle and a coolant bottle. It just comes in as part of the fan shroud. So probably a good idea, and it worked. And again, I'm just surprised no other division tried it. So what do you think of this 1976 Electra 225? That's not really a 225. Put a comment in the comment section and let me know. Thanks again for watching.